Hello, good evening, good evening. Welcome to the third session of People for Safe Spaces. My name is Madhuri. I'm a psychologist. I'm a suicide first responder and a certified tutor at Safe Space India. Safe Space as an organization works in the field of mental health and suicide prevention. We are essentially a training and education company that intends to make mental health a part of everyday conversation with people. Uh, it's interesting to have so many guests come over, talk about their experiences, and that's really what we want to do. As all of you are aware, that our aim is to make this conversation so genuine that we want to celebrate successes, experiences of all those who've done their suicide first responder workshops with us. Um, we understand that suicide as a subject can be very difficult to understand, comprehend, and only getting the right kind of knowledge is will get us where we really aim to, and which is to make suicide India absolutely suicide free, right? So in a sense, this conversation is to demystify suicide as a subject, to make sure that we share with you all those extraordinary stories of those people who have done the first responder workshop with us and what's it like for them. Allow me to introduce today's guest to all of you. Today we have somebody who truly believes in the fact that your life can be reimagined, and the name of her organization is Dynamic Living. When I spoke to her earlier, she seems like a complete balance of left and right brain, and when I say this, it's amazing because not just wellness, she is also done her law, and not just that, she's also been an RJ, she's been a voiceover artist, she's worked in the field of retail, she's worked with corporates, she's worked with business owners, and it's amazing to see a coach with 20 years of work experience yet sound so subtle, so simplistic, so mature, so comforting when you speak to her. She's a mindfulness, wellness, and a productivity coach, ICF certified. And it's my pleasure to invite Miss Sandhya Krishnan to this chat. Allow me to add her to this so all of us can have a brilliant interaction. I want you to know that you can put in your questions so that we will be able to answer those for you. So there we have. Super. Hi, David. So good to have you. Hey, Sandhya, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Good. You look stunning. My good Lord.
Thank you. Sari is always my comfort zone, my default option. So yeah, I feel it's nice and comfortable sari. Let me put it that way.
Wow, nice, interesting. So, Sandhya, welcome to Safe Space and People for Safe Spaces. I'm so glad you agreed to be a part of this, to help us make this conversation more simplistic yet meaningful for those who are still contemplating whether should education about suicide prevention really be done, so to speak, right? And we say that a lot of times we look for spaces that are safe, but here we believe that you and me and us as people together can be safe spaces for somebody else. And that's where I think we'd love to speak to you about your experiences. How was it for you? How did you stumble upon Safe Space and suicide first aid, signing up for it, and what's it been like? We'd love to hear your story, Sandhya.
Okay, thank you, Madhuri, and hello, everybody. For me, really, it was necessity born. A friend had told me about Safe Space maybe a year ago or something like that. But I thought, you know what, I work in the area of positive psychology, and this isn't really going to be my area of expertise, in inverted commas, because I'll come to that. But then I realized that as a mental health, as a person who works in mental health, for a lot of people, I'm like the first port of call, right? I'm accessible, but also there's being a life coach, people sort of perhaps perceive less stigma coming to speak to me. And in that, Madhuri, what was coming out was really tales of absolute anguish, and in fact SOSs, right, with people of all walks of life. And we always sort of associate, I mean, we not, I hope not all of us do, but certainly we have these perceptions of the kind of people who are thinking suicide. FYI, as a teenager, I had definitely contemplated it. I dare say there have been moments in my adult life as well where, you know, you do hit a low. I think if you've ever had a fever, you have had a depressive incident as well. And how deep that is, how long lasting that is, how much anguish it causes you, may change from person to person, but that you have had one is almost a given. And depending on what other things are happening in your life at any given point of time, it can just get to a point where you feel like it's too much. And one of the big learnings for me, so for me, I really reached out as SOS to you guys, saying that, look, what do I do? I get terrified. And, you know, the first time somebody reached out to me, I tried to reach out to that person's ecosystem and say, hey, can somebody help him? And, you know, I'm not so sure, this is not my domain, and all of that. And I got absolutely no support. And I said that, look, if I am keeping myself accessible, how then can I help that person in the critical 24 hours before we can even get to that help? It was just my luck that the person didn't do anything in that time, but it certainly took me a good week before, you know, I could communicate how serious this person's state of mind was. So to be able to handhold somebody in the first 24 hours, when they're having strong thoughts of suicide or whatever stage they might be, but just to be able to help and hold that space for them was critical. And honestly, I think even for myself, if I had somebody that I could speak to without judgment, without shame, today, I mean, I have no shame in saying that I had these thoughts, you know. If anything, I would say that society has failed me for not being there to hold my hand when I needed it. So if I'm going to be that person who says that, oh, sorry, this is not my area of expertise, I'm not so sure that I live with that or sleep with that, you know. So that's
amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So, you know, Sandhya, I was just going through, of course, you know, while we got to know each other, you were a part of the role play sessions as well. And I just got this vibe of you that you do come across as somebody who, you know, it's so comforting to speak to you, right? And being a coach, I think for so many of your clients, their employees, having to speak to you about work because it's productivity comes so natural. But if you are able to spot the sign of any other non-work distress, have you had an experience like that, you know, during your conversations?
Madhuri, 98% of my paying clients come to me with like a work issue where they want to increase their productivity. The reason I even just put productivity in my tagline is really to get that draw. I mean, my understanding of productivity, honestly, when you get to a place of being okay, when you get to a place of being content, when you get to a place where you're not overwhelmed, where you're not distracted, where you're not feeling less than the world or not okay, the result, the natural byproduct of that is productivity. It's really not something you need to work towards because each person has their own style. That beautiful 100% potential of the person is only limited by our own limiting beliefs, by our own fears, by our own thoughts. And sometimes, yes, it is medical, but for many more, but even to be able to identify that for starters, and then in the many other instances where we can help ourselves or we just need somebody to hold that space for us such that we can help ourselves. Those are I would say, make up 85% of really the work that I do. So in terms of distress, yes, it manifests itself in different ways. I think one of my big learnings from the workshop was that a person who's contemplating suicide is not really looking to end their lives as much as end their pain. So pain can just take different forms for different people. Like I have these highly productive, I'm stereotyping, of course, but you know, senior management men who've always gone from strength to strength. But to me, their pain is no less than a teenager who feels completely unloved or unaccepted. The pain is just as deep. We may just have developed better mechanisms to cope with it, but a coping mechanism is never a substitute for us actually addressing the cause of our pain, actually healing from it. So my heart goes out to whether you're dealing with it well or not. To me, the source of the pain and the ability to cope with that pain is really the heart of what each person's journey should be.
Phenomenal. So well answered, Sandhya, because we do mention that there are certain core beliefs on the basis of which the entire workshop is based on. One of them, and the first one, is that there is pain. So rather than we looking at it from a perspective of, oh, this is attention seeking, which is so natural for us because that's become our language.
Yes.
You go beyond that and say, no, it isn't attention seeking. There is something else that's going on. And when the conversation starts on that front, I think a lot of times there's no stopping the person. Then all you've got to do is listen to them and get them the help that's required, isn't it?
Absolutely. The whole mindfulness movement is really just bringing ourselves completely to the present. So I even tell like busy executives or harried moms that, listen, you don't lose yourself when you bring yourself completely to the person who's sitting in front of you. In fact, you are completely with yourself when you're with somebody. So when you're completely in the presence of, when I'm with you, nothing else is bothering me right now. There may be 100 things going on around me, but if I cannot give you this half an hour, if I cannot honor you with that presence, if I cannot honor myself to bring the entirety of me to you, Madhuri, at this point, then that's distraction, right? Then I'm neither there nor am I. So when you give that person that space and honor that person with that, there's so much. I mean, the person feels seen, and I think that's again the crux of what a lot of this is about. That we feel completely unseen, we feel completely unheard, and it's not like in most instances we're not able to solve our problems or at least articulate them. But to just have somebody say that I see you, I hear you, and there's no judgment, I accept you completely as you are. That's really the beauty of what your training does as well. And it completely resonates with me as a person, as a student of mindfulness.
Thank you so much. Thanks for, I think, just reinforcing that, Sandhya, because a lot of times, we are asked that I'm a parent, should I do this? How is it going to help me? Or I've already done my master's in counseling psychology. How does that work? And coming from you, one side you are a mindfulness coach, you're trained on REBT, on transactional analysis, all of that. The other side, you've also studied law, and you do incorporate neuroscience and science elements to help people arrive at their conclusions, So it's important for us to understand that, this workshop isn't just subject or profile specific. It just adds like a life skill to your existing knowledge. And I just wanted to understand if you could resonate with any of this, what we spoke in any sections of the workshop.
Well, absolutely. One of the big trainings that we're given as coaches is to not bring all of our gyan to the session, right? Yeah. If I'm already thinking about, what is the good advice I'm going to give? In fact, when we don't give advice, we need to come from a place of not knowing. But very to this workshop, even like you said, it's a life skill, but it also gives you a vocabulary. There are certain ways in which you are able. I mean, to again. It's that first critical 24 hours, right? I can, as a well-meaning friend, say, "Chal yaar, let's go have a drink. Everything will be okay." But is that what's really going to help? Or it may just, distract the person momentarily. Is that what truly helps? There is a lot of science, a lot of research that's gone into the program that you guys have developed. So to me, it gave me so much more confidence that I understand so much better. I understood myself so much better, to be honest, in this. And I think that process of growth and learning continues no matter. I mean, you can have degrees, and each one sort of equips you in particular set of skills. It's like saying a fabulous actor should also make a great politician. The doctorate degrees in the world may not equip you to be a good suicide first responder. So this is a very, very, very particular skill that and it's such a short commitment of time, and to think that you can save one life and you can enable that. I mean, I feel so humbled that in the few instances that I have been able to intervene, that my only quest right now is, there's so much more left to do, and it's never going to be enough, but one day at a time.
Absolutely.
One day at a time.
Absolutely. Wow. It's just feels so good to see the zest in you, Sandhya, honestly. And like I said, I think I just, you just give that out, right? Whether it's a workshop, whether it's a role play, even your assessment spoke volumes of your own understanding with which you applied that information. So, just a couple of things that I wanted to know was, because like you said, you don't come to a session with your gyan, right? What stuck by you? It's been long that you did the workshop, right? What is it that even today, middle of the night, somebody wakes you up, those 1-2 things that stuck to you and said, this is what is pertinent?
I think one of the big aspects was to just ask suicide. That to me was like a game changer. So often we sort of sidestep the uncomfortable topics, we don't want to say it out loud, thinking that we might precipitate it. That was number one. There is a point at which, I mean, of course, we get to that conversation, and you guys train us on how we get to that point where we ask, but that to ask that question outright and how to ask it, we assume that it will put the person on the back foot, that they will cower away. But again, statistics and study and the science and research behind it has shown us that that's not in fact true. The second aspect, I think, is, and this again resonates so strongly with the research that I do, it's about awakening compassion, which is very different from a paralyzing empathy. There is a point, so again, neuroscience and the research on altruism shows us that pure empathy is just that I'm feeling everything that you're feeling. So we might fear that, oh, if I talk to somebody who's thinking suicide, then even it will ignite in me all these suicidal thoughts. So far, not once. Okay, and I'm speaking as a person who has had very strong thoughts of suicide. The compassion centers in our brain actually help us feel, be present for the other person, but it also ignites in us a very strong center for action, but also a courage that doesn't make us worry about the repercussions to ourselves. It's that center that allows people to do so much of good work. Sometimes when I see my friends who work in public sector, and I have a friend who works with homeless people, I think to myself, this one man in his lifetime can't possibly solve the problem of homelessness. He sees it everywhere. How does he prevent the despair from, how does he even wake up every morning? But today, the fact that he's been able to help, today he now works at policy level. And the fact that he can create impact at that level, and he began with literally just spending time outside of his work hours, just helping people on the streets and asking them what they needed. He didn't come from any kind of background, no sort of expertise on that front. So when you ignite compassion within yourself, we think that, oh, empathetic people are so soft, we are like cows, we are all very passive. In fact, it's not. Compassion is an extremely active aspect of the brain. It triggers action, it triggers bravery, it triggers courage, and it allows us, tremendous strength without fear, which can actually just cripple us. So these were my two big takeaways. I would always think that, do I want to get involved? Isn't it better that I stay out of this? Somebody will sue me tomorrow saying that I'm a coach. And all of these, these are all, our fear-based brain can bring up like 100,000 scenarios. Our compassion-activated brain helps us make judicious action, very brave, courageous action. And to me, it's like Zameen Asman ka farak when you switch that part of your brain on.
Also, I think one of the most empowering parts was, I don't know your views on that, but it's not just gyan, like you said, it's also closure of the loop. It's not just listening, and like you said, empathetic listening and saying, yeah, I get what you're saying. Sometimes you may not get what the person's saying because you've never experienced it before.
Absolutely.
But simply even saying that to the person that listen, at the moment I don't get you. I don't get what you're feeling. Having said that, I'm sorry, but what can I do to help you get better? You know, and closing that bit where we spoke about safety planning also in the workshop, sort of makes the person feel so, like you said, seen, felt safe,
And
isn't
very
it?
so, right? I did worry always that again, this is our fear speaking, and I'm being very open about this. I did worry that, oh, if I go to help somebody, they will get very attached to me because they're in such a vulnerable place. I mean, again, just to be able to vocalize these fears and understand what the stats are like on that, and also, like you said, the safety planning very actively requires us to reach out to somebody in the person's ecosystem, sort of hand over to them, because we may not, we may not all be in a position. We all have our own lives to live. Yes, nobody's doing this at the cost of their jobs, at the cost of their families or anything like that. So there's absolutely no any kind of excuse that we may have put in our head that not right now, I'm so busy, maybe 10 years down the line when I have more time, or when I'm retired, or when my children are grown up, then I'll do this. That's the fallacy that I think was dispelled so categorically for me. This does not take much time, and that it does not create a dependence or whatever in terms of the fears that we may have, and that there is a very concrete action plan that we follow, step 1, 2, 3, 4, again, none of which takes a lot of time. Until that the person is safely handed over to people that are better equipped and may have the resources and the time and the wherewithal to care for them. But that critical first 24 hours, if there was somebody that just said, I hear you, I hear you.
Yeah.
We're speaking in Chinese, but you can, I think pain is fairly universal the world over. It's one of our most primitive affects in neuroscience terms. So we don't have to understand that person's pain to know that it is pain, and that we know what pain feels like, and none of us likes it.
So true, so true. Very well pointed out, because I was studying your website and the work that you do, and very clearly, somewhere it mentions that how you believe that as an individual, how the ability of how we take what comes our way and what we make of it is so important. You never know. Nobody comes with a tag saying, I do have thoughts of suicide. But seeing their behavior, body language, their responses, uh, any comments or hints on the signs that that we spoke of in the workshop that you could pick in your clients going forward, or what changed after you did this?
I think so. Again, as a coach, we are trained to look for non-verbal cues as well. But I think very specific signs that we just become sort of far more fine-tuned to to
Yes.
the indicators of suicidal thoughts, which may be a little different than somebody saying, I want to quit my job, I want to quit my life, is
Yeah.
very different. So
True.
yes, I mean, just simple things like actually verbalizing. People will talk about leaving the world, or what the world will look like without them, or an end to their pain, which sounds very final, which is not solution oriented, rather than a sort of act of finality, sort of them talking about, planning about what happens to their possessions, what happens to their, take care of my cat. And these are all little signs that tell us that, okay, we're seeing here that the person is contemplating an end to, or him or her not being there in the near future. In terms of the non-verbal signs, again, and this is where what I have had to actually experience, just in terms of like you almost see a lack of will to live, and that shows in, there are days when all of us don't want to get out of bed, brush our teeth, and you just want
Yeah.
to cower under the blanket and say, I don't want to face the world today. And COVID especially has brought that out in a lot.
Yeah.
but somehow, we may do it for a day, we may do it for a weekend, but somehow we pull ourselves out. If we see that a person has not done that, like I check on clients when they haven't called me back for an appointment. So I say, listen, what's going on there? Is it that you don't want, I mean, if you want to terminate, and surprisingly enough, I learned this from my boss when I was in sales. It's like, don't assume that the person doesn't want it. I mean, there's always so many other things going on in their life. So ask the question. Don't be afraid to ask the question. Let them say, hey, I want to terminate this coaching. I don't want to work with you anymore. I don't like you as a coach. I'm fine with that. I just need to know that you're okay. And literally that's what I ask them now. I'm like, what's going on? How have you been? Are you okay? And that tells me, just the way they respond tells me so much. Obviously, when I would see people in person, you can see from their cues, just how they're dressed, how unkempt. Now, these are all, I mean, it's not as simple, as black and white as that. You need to see how the person was before to see what the change has been, right? When you suddenly notice. But you can see that with friends. If a friend of yours is otherwise garrulous or whatever, suddenly gone very quiet. Somebody who loved getting dressed or whatever, maybe, planning outings or now Zoom calls, suddenly just withdrawn and doesn't want to do anything. And a gentle probing is all it takes. We just need to ask, are you okay? Sometimes that's just assuming that they want to be left alone and assuming that they don't want. We're so quick, to say that, okay, you know what, maybe we shouldn't disturb them and things like that. At times like this, we know that it's so isolating, and isolation is one of the biggest fallouts of COVID, right? And
absolutely.
The physical and psychological impacts of isolation. This is not the time to say, I respect your space, bro. If you're not answering the phone, I will call you 5 times till you do. So I would say, let's err on the side of compassion and rather than on covering our rear ends.
Wow, that's phenomenal, because we do see that, and we are urging so many corporates, we are urging principals, we are urging parents that do this, because we don't know what's going to come once most people are saying COVID we need to live with and all of that, but the damage that it already is doing to people who've either lost their loved ones in COVID, closures haven't happened, they haven't met, seen, jobs are a problem, schoolings is a problem, loans are a problem, finances are a problem. We don't know, who in your circle may just need you to be there, like you said, and ask, are you okay? What's going on? You don't say this ever. What makes you say this? Do you want to talk about it? And I clearly remember that after our session, I think you and I had a conversation where you did spot something in a couple friend of yours, and it's phenomenal how you dealt with it, and it's just not doctorish language, but yet you were there for them. So that's so important, and you, I think, brought out some beautiful points and links that people could understand. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Madhuri, for saying that, and thank you for holding my hand through that. That's the other amazing part about this community, right? Which is that sometimes we're so newly trained, and we may not always. The amazing part is that we have all of you to sound off of. Am I doing the right thing? Step in. If we're unsure, we have that access. I think 2 things. One is that a lot of us are grappling we're grappling with things before COVID as well, like you listed things. But I think even something like mental illness, many of us grapple with so many aspects of it. There is this long-term depression that a lot of people, they're very high functioning, but they have this deep sense of sadness that never goes away for them. Now, when you're saying that, I'm high functioning, I can do this, I've managed, like I've got 8 balls up in the air that I'm juggling. Now comes COVID, or now comes a job loss, now comes a big 9th or 10th or 15 together, and suddenly, the 8 that you were holding up with so much care suddenly becomes 15, and how can you be expected to? Everybody's capacity or everybody's pain tolerance is so different. That's one part of it. The other part is also the way teenagers, for example, deal with things. We assume, in fact, it's a fallacy to assume that adults are rational. None of us is rational, but
Yeah.
particularly teenagers and young adults, the entire neocortex is only developing between the ages of 18 and 24. So I see a lot of young children, for example, now who don't want to step out of the house because they've heard COVID or they've heard people are dying. Teenagers are processing this information very differently because they simply don't have the kind of cognitive long-term risk assessment, thinking that adults have. We adults are so irrational, the best of us, our attachments. I see people who
True.
are terrified of suddenly losing a parent because they are elderly, or somebody in their family who may have asthma or is overweight. So is it rational? What are the chances? I mean, the statistics may tell you that it's 1 in 100,000, but can you rationalize with somebody who has a fear? The entire, the whole point of an irrational fear is that, you can't, at that point, it's not to give them facts and figures. It's really to show compassion and to hold that space and allow them. Sometimes when you just vocalize, when you say out your fears, when you hear yourself, when you hear it bounce off somebody else, when you write down your fear and you can see it in black and white, it just helps to kind of bring that pressure cooker down to like on a simmer, and that's really all the job that we're doing when we hold a space and when we intervene as first responders, I think.
Beautiful. I think so well put, because uh, it is a pressure cooker and they haven't told this to anybody before. And the fact that you ask them, they're not going to say, oh, yeah, how did you get that? They will initially say, no, I'm okay, but it's not okay. And when you still have the courage to push that conversation as gently as you can, will bring them to a point where they say, you know what? Yeah, it's been messed up and I don't know what to make of it. I think this is the best way, So I think it's phenomenal, Sandhya. I think the kind of work you do, and we were privileged to have you, honestly, at Safe Space and to have this association. Any quick recommendations, signing off remarks, anything that you want our viewers to know, listen, adhere to, stick by?
The one which would be the same that you guys are always saying, that get the help exists today. And one of the beauties of the lockdown is that today everything is accessible online. If you have hesitated to meet a mental health professional because you don't want to be seen outside their clinic or whatever it may be, all of these can today be circumvented because there's so many of us that are seeing people online. Ask yourself what's really important to you, that your neighbor is going to see that you're going to a mental health professional, or that you're going to have 20, 40, 60 wonderful years ahead of you, rather than living with this pain for the rest of your life. Pain is one of the most, it's like an acid within us, it doesn't just go away or evaporate by yourself. It sometimes does take active work. And one of the first things, which is the other thing I wanted to say, one of the first things that you can do is to one, accept that it is pain, and I am feeling it, and what are the things I can do to take some care of myself. This whole thing of I will do it when I have the time, or I'm too busy to do this. If it's important to you, you will make the time for it. We all have the same 24 hours. Dropping a year in college, dropping a job, letting childcare or home care fall by the wayside is okay. Nourishing yourself. And if you're not there for yourself, I can give it to you in writing. You are there for nobody else. So for all of the souls that feel, oh, I'm so selfless and I have to be there. I mean, I'm going to share a small story. I had a friend whose mother was very ill, and this was when we were in school, and she didn't want to reveal her illness because we had some exams coming up. And during the course of our exams, she died. It became a critical situation, and she died. To date, I want to ask that lady. I was so angry with her. I want to ask her, what would be more important to my friend, that he flunked that exam because she had to go to hospital, or that he had to live, for 45 years without a mother? So, when you ask yourself these very basic questions, a lot of the fallacies that we live with just fall away.
Absolutely.
I think just taking the time to ask yourself that question of what's really important. And the good thing is we have a chance now to really reset and ask ourselves and live our lives more consciously. So nothing can be more important than that.
Absolutely. And we keep telling people that look, anybody can become a first responder, right? The fact that if you're there for yourself, you'll be there for somebody else, and if you're trained on having that conversation, chances are that you will get the person the help that he needs. So it doesn't matter who you are. If you're 18 and above, just go for it. We've had 60-year-old doctors, lawyers who said, listen, I don't want to risk it. We've had doctors coming in saying, even though I'm a psychiatrist, but this area, no, I think I need more information about this. We've had young MBBS pass out doctors saying, you know what, before I get into my main practice, I want to do this because it just makes me more, people view me as a doctor and somebody who is up there who will have answers to everything. But if I can't pick this sign, I will not genuinely be able to help them. I just don't want to prescribe medicines and that's that, right?
Oh, absolutely. I'll add one other aspect, which is that, whether if you just felt like you've been going along aimlessly or if you just feel like I've done nothing with my life, this can give you such a tremendous sense of purpose as well. Nothing can ignite
Absolutely.
a sense of purpose than being present for somebody else, altruistic
So
activity.
true.
So if you're looking for meaning for your life, just sort of investing time in, I always tell people that action is the best antidote to despair. So and sometimes we get caught in like this hamster wheel of our own thinking, our preoccupation with our own selves and our own problems and our own, when I see somebody working for somebody else, when your focus is on somebody else, trust me, it's not going to matter to you the bickering and all the little problems that you had, and but something
So
as
true.
just fights with your maid or fights with your mother-in-law can drive you crazy. But the minute you
Absolutely.
found a bigger reason, like something that takes you outside of your own head and outside of yourself, it's not like mother-in-law is miraculously going to get transformed. It's just that these things affect you. It's almost like you've got a bicycle and somebody's pumped nice air into it. You're still going over the same stones, but you're not feeling every bump as much because your focus is completely elsewhere. So
Absolutely.
for your own well-being, I would encourage people to think outside of themselves for our own happiness. We're such an irreverent, jokey, laughy sort of, and there's space for everybody. Some of us are very quiet on the group, some of us like me are much more noisy on the group, and that's okay, and we celebrate each person's individuality. But also I feel so much
Absolutely.
alone being part of the group, right? I felt terribly lonely at times as well. Sometimes when people look to you to be the pillar of support, stuff like that. I need help. I need support. I want somebody to say, I screwed up, and it's been wonderful to have this very non-judgmental space to be a part of.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sandhya, once again. I think this was precious. I think such important learnings from you, and the application, not just in the space of suicide, but also mental health, mindfulness, is so important. And I wish you lots of success. I hope and pray we stay together for long and forever. Super. You have a great evening. Thank you
Thank you.
so much for
I'm not sure if you can hear me. It
I
says
can.
that it's okay. It says they're saying that you've created a bond for life, and that the person who gives benefits even more. So I can say that's
Absolutely.
completely true for me. I don't want to go anywhere unless you guys kick me out. So thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this. It's really been
Super.
fun and wonderful, wonderful. Please keep up the good work, all of you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandhya. Thank you once again.
Thank
Take
you.
care. See
See
you
you.
around.
See you.
Bye. See you.